First puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. Here are checks in puzzle position. G4 check. Rook to D3 check. Rook to F2 check. Answer to this puzzle is Rook to D3 check. King to E4. Rook takes bishop. Next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn check. Queen takes pawn. The checks are Queen takes pawn check. Queen to E4 check. Queen to H1 check. Rook to G7 check. Rook to H1 check. The answer is Queen to H1 check. Rook to H3. Queen takes rook checkmate. Let's see the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Rook takes rook. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Rook to F8 check. The best move in puzzle position is Rook takes rook. Rook takes rook. Rook to F8 check. King takes pawn. Rook takes rook. Let us go to the next puzzle. Puzzle position vulnerabilities are Bishop takes bishop. Pawn takes pawn, check. Bishop takes pawn, check. Checks in puzzle position are Knight to C6, checkmate. Pawn takes pawn, check. E5, check. Bishop takes pawn, check. Bishop to C3, check. The best move in puzzle position is Knight to C6, checkmate. One more. Threats in puzzle position are Bishop takes pawn, check. Bishop takes knight. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Bishop takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is Bishop takes knight. Rook takes bishop. Bishop to B7. Another one. Threats in puzzle position are Bishop takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. Checks in this position are Bishop takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is Queen takes pawn. Queen to G4. Bishop takes pawn, check. King to H8. Queen takes queen. Pawn takes queen. Rook to H1, check. Bishop to H6. Rook takes bishop, check. King to G7. Knight to F5, check. King takes bishop. Rook to F6, check. Another one. The threats are pawn takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Pawn takes pawn. Knight takes bishop. Knight takes pawn. Rook takes knight. Here are the checks. Pawn takes pawn, check. Queen to G6, check. Queen to F7, check. Queen to H6, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Answer to this puzzle is Queen to H6, check. King to H8. Queen takes rook, checkmate. Next puzzle. Here are the threats. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn. Rook takes pawn. The checks are Queen to H5, check. Queen to H3, check. Rook to F1, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook to F2. Knight to F4. Rook takes queen. Rook takes rook. Bishop takes knight. Next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Rook takes pawn. Queen takes rook. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. The checks are Queen takes pawn, check. Solution to the puzzle is Queen takes rook. Pawn takes queen. Rook takes queen. Next puzzle. The threats are Rook takes pawn. Queen takes bishop. Queen takes rook, check. Queen takes pawn. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to D1, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Queen takes rook, check. King to G1. Queen to E3, check. Let's continue. Here are the threats. There are no threats in this position. The checks are Queen to H4, check. Rook to H1, check. Solution to the puzzle is Queen to H4, check. Rook to H3. Queen takes pawn, checkmate. Another puzzle. The threats are Knight takes bishop, check. Pawn takes rook. Rook takes bishop. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Knight takes bishop, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight takes bishop, check. Pawn takes knight. Pawn takes rook. Next puzzle. The threats are Bishop takes pawn. Queen takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. The checks are f4, check. Queen to e5, check. Queen to f2, check. Queen takes pawn, check. The best move in puzzle position is f4, check. Another puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen to h7, check. Queen takes pawn, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Rook to f3. Rook to g8. Rook to h3. Queen takes rook. Queen takes queen. Next, the threats are pawn takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes pawn, check. Let us look at checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen to h5, check. Bishop to g6, check. Solution to the puzzle is queen takes pawn, check. Knight to e7. Queen to f7, check. King to d8. Knight to e6, checkmate. Let us go to the next puzzle. Threats in puzzle position are bishop takes pawn. Here are checks in puzzle position. Knight to b6, check. Solution to the puzzle is rook to e4. f5. Rook takes bishop. Next puzzle, the threats are there are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. The puzzle is solved using rook to h6. b5. Queen to b7. Rook to a1. Rook to h8. Queen takes rook, check. Rook takes queen. Another one. Threats in puzzle position are queen takes knight. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes bishop. Rook takes pawn. Bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. Solution to the puzzle is pawn takes bishop. Let us go to the next puzzle. Here are threats in puzzle position. Knight takes pawn, check. Knight takes pawn. King takes pawn. Checks in this position are knight takes pawn, check. Knight to e2, check. The answer is b5. Bishop to e8. b6. Bishop to c6. Knight takes pawn. One more. Here are threats in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook, check. Here are checks in puzzle position. Queen takes pawn, check. Queen takes rook, check. Queen to d1, check. Queen to b1, check. Answer to this puzzle is queen takes pawn, check. One more. The threats are knight takes pawn. Knight takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Bishop takes pawn. Rook takes bishop. Checks in puzzle position are knight to d6, check. Knight to e7, check. The answer is knight to d6, check. King to b8. Queen takes queen. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are rook takes pawn. Here are the checks. Rook to b4, check. Rook to c1, check. The best move in puzzle position is rook to c1, check. King to d3. Rook to d1, check. King to c3. Rook takes knight. f6, check. King to e4. Let's see the next puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. Queen takes bishop. Pawn takes bishop. Bishop takes pawn. There are no checks in this position. The best move in puzzle position is pawn takes bishop. Knight takes knight. Queen takes knight. Another puzzle. Let us look at threats in puzzle position. There are no threats in this position. There are no checks in this position. Here is the solution to the puzzle. King to g5. King to f7. King to h6. Next, puzzle position vulnerabilities are queen takes pawn. Queen takes knight. Rook takes knight. The checks are knight to e6, check. Here is the solution to the puzzle. Knight to e6, check. King to g8. Knight takes queen. Bishop to h2, check. Queen takes bishop. Thank you for watching. Please like and subscribe.